Considering Zodiac's braggadocio in written form. In an October 22nd San Francisco Examiner article, Professor D.C.B. Marsh, president of the American Cryptogram Association, threw down a proverbial gauntlet. Quote, "I invite Zodiac to send the ACA a cipher code, however complicated, which will truly and honestly include his name." Unquote. Less than 3 weeks later, the Zodiac would ultimately answer this challenge. The first of 3 additional ciphers arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle on November 8, 1969, all of which would eventually prove to be an enduring enigma. As with the previously solved 408 cipher, the 3 unsolved ciphers are typically referred to by the number of characters they contain, often preceded by the letter Z. They are the Z340, also known as the dripping pen cipher, in reference to an accompanying greeting card, the Z13, often dubbed the My Name Is cipher, and the Z32, or the Mount Diablo or button cipher, as it was delivered in conjunction with both a map of the Mount Diablo region and a written reference to an earlier bizarre demand for the public to adorn themselves with buttons decorated with the killer's circle and cross logo. The most basic form of cipher involves the substitution of one alphabetic character or symbol for another, the substitution remaining consistent throughout the enciphered message. As an example, we can use a message intercepted from an enemy during a hypothetical military conflict. Using a technique known as frequency analysis, we can hazard a guess as to the true nature of the more common cipher symbols. Barring any lipogrammic stunts, such as Ernest Wright's novel Gadsby, in which the letter E is entirely omitted, letters in any written language appear with a certain predictable frequency. In English, for example, the letter E is most commonly used, followed by T, A, O, I, N, and so on. Thus, in a simple substitution cipher, one would expect for the proxy of these letters to appear with proportional frequency. Eventually, using frequency analysis, we would arrive at something constructive. Contextually, we know the message is military in nature, so it would be reasonable to assume a word like operation or retreat is present. In this case, the word attack seems to jump out. If attack is indeed part of the message, the letters C and K must still be hidden. Although not impossible, it is less likely for C to be enciphered to itself. Of course, considering all the remaining characters are unique, we can simply select 2 of them at random and continue. Finally, since we are confident the A in the remaining string of characters is correctly deciphered, we can reasonably conclude that the remaining word or words contains the letter A. Even if the rest of the decipherment relied on other contextual clues, no message exists in a vacuum, so if considered carefully, our final solution would provide a sensible and actionable result. A somewhat more complex method of encryption used in the 408, and which is also suspected by the ACA, FBI, and others to have been used in each of the Zodiac's successive ciphers, is known as homophonic substitution. Instead of an individual letter being enciphered by one symbol, a letter is exchanged for one of several. Taking on the role of the hypothetical enemy in our original example, when converting our original plaintext message, we can encipher the letter A into one of several other characters we have determined ahead of time. Doing this will thwart any attempts at simple frequency analysis, as each character within the ciphertext appears only once. Obviously, numbers or invented symbols could be used instead of letters, and thus vastly increase the amount of available enciphering characters to choose from. It is important to note that homophonic substitution methods do not imply a two-way street. While one is allowed to exchange a plaintext letter for one of several cipher symbols, one is not allowed to do the reverse. Doing so would create an utterly incoherent message to the recipient, as he would be reduced to essentially playing a confused game of hangman. The point of a cipher is to hide information, not destroy it. Though it is commonly believed that all of the Zodiac's ciphers use some process of homophonic substitution, it has not been determined if the same process was employed by the killer for every cipher. Indeed, the fact that only the 408 has thus far been solved would suggest otherwise. Perhaps the 340 isn't a true cipher at all, and something more akin to a recreational puzzle, like a word find. Or maybe a massive transposition of symbols is necessary, perhaps cutting and pasting whole sections of the grid into a different arrangement. Some of the symbols in the 340, as well as the successive ciphers, are similar to capital letters of the Latin alphabet. Could these symbols actually be plain text that was purposefully left unciphered? The first 3 characters in the 340 read as the word her. Could this be a clue? The first part of a name, perhaps, like Herb? This seems doubtful, as such a feature would only help would-be codebreakers. While it's true that one can often hide something in plain sight, doing so in a cipher only weakens the cipher as a whole. A typical code-breaking attempt will start by using the most obvious information. Hiding information in a cipher in plain sight simply screams, "Start here." Unique to line 6 of the 340 is an apparent mistake, where the killer seems to have scratched out a letter to write a corrected reverse K above it. When dealing with any form of substitution cipher, characters may not necessarily correspond to a letter. For example, a plus symbol may represent a space between characters, or perhaps indicate a change in the direction of text flow. It may also symbolize nothing and may be a red herring, designed to waste the analyst's time. Could the correction be just such a ruse? Perhaps it's meant to make investigators think that the code covers a real, substantive message, when it in reality only contains gibberish. But if the code does not contain a real plaintext message, why bother correcting what amounts to a non-mistake? Would-be code crackers run the risk of creating a Matryoshka doll of the mind, trying to determine if the killer knows we know he knows, and whether he'll play to that knowledge or create some double-triple bluff to keep our heads spinning. As noted cryptologist Dr. Ryan Garlick states in his March 2014 paper, How to Know That You Haven't Solved the Zodiac 340 Cipher, a symbol, quote, may translate into an English letter, a concept, an Arabic letter, a word from a book, punctuation, nothing at all, directions such as go up in the cipher, or something else entirely, unquote. It is possible the 13 cipher was created in tandem with the 340, using the same enciphering chart, as it were. If we are to take the Zodiac at face value, the 13 could very well be his actual name. Of course, the Zodiac could have claimed his name to be anything, including a contemporary though incorrect suspect, and thus throw the police investigation into further chaos. But perhaps his ego got the best of him, and as many in the investigative business still believe, the Zodiac's true identity is somehow encoded in the 13 symbols. The 13 appears to be written with some type of symmetry, similar to a mirror image. 3 alphabetic characters, followed by 2 non-alphabetic characters, followed by a single alphabetic and a central non-alphabetic. This central symbol, which is similar in appearance to a numeral 8 inscribed within a circle, in fact appears in 3 locations within the cipher, suggesting the possibility that they represent something other than a letter. As pointed out by linguist Dr. Keith Massey, using the idea of a mirror image, if we write the name of a known Zodiac suspect, Arthur Leigh Allen, using the diminutive of his first name, forwards and backwards, aligning one atop the other, a pair of interesting features emerge. Duplicate characters in the name seem to align with their respective positions, as well as some of the non-alphabetic symbols in the cipher, implying something unique about them, in this case that they are duplicated. There is, of course, a substantial problem with this type of analysis. If a suspect is believed to be the true guilty party by the analyst before he or she attempts to analyze a cipher, that suspect's name will invariably appear, only the interpretations of ambiguous data that agree with a preconceived conclusion given any weight in the analyst's mind. Like the credulous devotee of a psychic who makes thousands of predictions, they will only remember the handful of predictions that turned out to be correct, when objectively, those psychic hits were no more numerous than what could be expected from blind luck. For example, using the same mirror image technique, the name Kermit the Frog exhibits similar oddities. Again, 3 of the corresponding letters in the name align. And though they do not all align with non-alphabetic ciphertext as before, the letters in question exactly match each other, implying just as much of a consistent pattern. There could be some labyrinthine method of mathematically anagramming the letters and symbols to make the solution more plausible, but such efforts would ironically leave said solution even more wanting. If the rules for codebreaking can be changed at will, we can change them to whatever we'd like at any time, and we'll never, at least in our own heads, be wrong. Sent to the San Francisco Chronicle on June 26, 1970, the Z32 is also known as the map cipher, or the Phillips roadmap cipher, as it was a letter accompanied by a Phillips 66 roadmap of the San Francisco Bay Area. The letter concluded thusly: The map, coupled with this code, will tell you where the bomb is set. You have until next fall to dig it up. An additional letter, known as the Little List, was also sent, postmarked the same day. On the 5th page of this second letter, Zodiac states, P.S. The Mount Diablo code concerns radians and inches along the radians. On the map, a hand-drawn compass eerily reminiscent of the Zodiac's signature is positioned directly over Mount Diablo, the largest peak in the area. Along with the compass, Zodiac presumably indicates the map should be oriented to magnetic north. In the cipher, only 3 shapes, the C, the O, and the hollow triangle, appear more than once. This implies that the cipher is a homophonic substitution, as one would expect to find a repetition of letters in even a brief message. Strangely, nearly all of the actual symbols used in the 32 cipher were previously used in the solved 408. Since using the 408 key only yields garbled nonsense, it is obvious the Zodiac had adapted his codes since July of 1969. The top line of the 32 cipher contains a capital M and a reversed K. This may be significant because identical symbols are also found in lines of the earlier 340 cipher, as well as each of the last lines of the 3 portions of the 408. Could this indicate some kind of signature? If we refer back to the other Zodiac ciphers, some strange features seem to pop out. In the 13 cipher, for example, a capital M and a non-reversed K are used. One possibility may point toward the use of a mirror in the 13 to flip the letters horizontally to render the code even more confusing. Letters such as A and M have horizontal symmetry, yet letters such as K do not. Mirrors have long been used in enciphering, the most well-known example being Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote notes via mirror image to confound would-be snoops. The 408 was solved without taking such mirror imaging into account, but it is very likely that Zodiac would have altered or improved his methods based on the perceived ease with which the first cipher was broken. The directional compass drawn on the map seems to imply a clock face, such as 3 o'clock equals due east, so a reasonable expectation would be for the plaintext of the 32 cipher to contain 1 or more numbers to indicate a direction. Of course, Zodiac could have simply spelled out numbers in the message. But the final postscript clue also contains several oddities. The word radians is written as both lowercase and title case, an admittedly minor inconsistency considering the Zodiac's penchant for misspellings, but it could be significant. What appears to be a hashtag or number symbol is written over a caret, indicating that it was added in after the rest of the note was written. Could this indicate some form of clarification on the killer's part? It seems hard to believe that the Zodiac would add information that would assist any investigation, yet it could be that, in his twisted way, he wanted to give police a fair chance. In mathematics, a radian is a unit of angular measurement. Basically, it is determined by taking the radius of a circle and wrapping it around the same circle's circumference. Thus, in any given circle, 1 radian is equivalent to about 57.296 degrees, or 180 over pi. Perhaps the Zodiac meant radius and not radians, something that could completely change the intended meaning. Though mathematically speaking this would constitute a fairly fundamental error, there is no reason to believe the Zodiac had any deep grasp of geometry or its specialized vocabulary. The number of people who have been accused of being the Zodiac killer is mind-boggling, with multiple hundreds being suspected by at least one vocal investigator at one time or another. While this may serve as a warning against unchecked paranoia and the unsettling link we may share with psychopathic monsters, it should also remind one that the human compulsion to find patterns is unrelenting. But all patterns are not created equal. The fact that some of the oft-accused individuals seem to share more than one glaring physical trait or behavior with the Zodiac seems to go beyond mere coincidence. The following is a sample of some of the more well-known suspects in the case. Guy Ward Hendrickson, a carpenter from Orange County who had died of cancer in 1983, was publicly accused on April 29, 2009 by his daughter, Deborah Perez, though this claim was later disputed by Hendrickson's second daughter, Janice, 2 days later. The idea that her father was the Zodiac first occurred to Ms. Perez while viewing a segment on the popular television program America's Most Wanted in 2007. Bizarrely, many details of Ms. Perez's accusations center around her indirect involvement in the Zodiac's crimes, of which she claims at the time of their occurrence to have been ignorant. Among other things, Perez claims, when she was 7 years old, she accompanied her father on the Blue Rock Springs and Paul Stein murders. She elaborates that she was neither a party nor a witness to either event, but had heard unexplained popping noises while sitting in the family car waiting for her father to return. She claims to have embroidered the executioner's hood worn by the Zodiac during the Lake Berryessa attack. She admits to authoring some of the Zodiac letters, though she does not claim any involvement with the creation or distribution of the ciphers. And finally, she claims Paul Stine's eyeglasses are in her possession, taken by her father as a memento. Admittedly, Hendrickson does resemble one of the police sketches, and though by no means evidence, it is interesting that during her May 1st press conference, Janice Hendrickson did acknowledge that her father was physically abusive and may have possessed a predilection toward violence. Quote, "My father was real bullheaded, and he did have a temper, and he did hit me, but did he kill people? I don't believe he did." Unquote. Spokesman and former attorney Kevin McLean conducted an independent investigation of Deborah Perez's claims, including a forensic handwriting analysis and psychological examination. Forensic psychologist Jack N. Singer stated that in regards to Perez, there was, quote, "absolutely no evidence of deception, delusional thinking, or loss of contact with reality," unquote. Likewise, document examiner Bart Baggett concluded that Perez likely wrote 3 of the Zodiac letters, though his opinion was, in his own words, preliminary and qualified, noting in particular that his analysis was based on recent handwriting samples and not samples contemporary to the era. How could Perez, a more or less lifelong inhabitant of the Golden State, have no knowledge of the Zodiac's existence before seeing a broadcast almost 40 years after the events? Surely even the most tenuous grip on current affairs and local history would expose one to something as iconic as the Zodiac Killer, a man who was the basis for decades of movies, television shows, and literature, a man whose police sketch has come to symbolize human evil as much as John Wayne Gacy's Pogo the Clown or the wild stares of Ted Bundy and Myra Hindley. Also, several months after the matter was brought to public attention, Inspector Kevin Jones of the SFPD Homicide Bureau revealed in regard to what were claimed to be Paul Stine's glasses, quote, "they're not Paul Stine's glasses," unquote. Any DNA that may have existed at one time was hopelessly decayed and far beyond a testable state. Oddly, Paul Stine's eyeglasses were indeed missing from the crime scene. The 3 teenage witnesses, as well as Officer David Folk, noted the man later presumed to be the Zodiac was wearing glasses, a notable difference compared to other witness descriptions. Could the Zodiac, as Deborah Perez suggests, have taken Stine's glasses as a souvenir, or could he have donned them as an impromptu disguise? This argument is supported in the bus bomb letter of November 9, 1969, in which the Zodiac states, quote, "I look like the description passed out only when I do my thing. The rest of the time I look entirely different. I shall not tell you what my disguise consists of when I kill," unquote. It is entirely possible that Deborah Perez fully believes her own story, but a belief is not objective proof. To further the point, it should be noted that sometime before the public accusation of her deceased father, Ms. Perez claimed to true crime author M. William Phelps that she was, in fact, the illegitimate child of President John F. Kennedy, an assertion that speaks for itself. One would be hard-pressed to find a suspect with a closer physical resemblance to the widely known police sketch than Earl Van Best Jr. But despite the passionate accusation made by his biological son, Gary Stewart, whom had been given up for adoption as an infant, Van Best's links to the Zodiac case are somewhat tenuous, most of which are laid out by Stewart and Susan Mustafa, co-author of the 2014 book The Most Dangerous Animal of All. According to Stewart and Mustafa, 28-year-old Van Best had at one time married a 14-year-old girl named Judith Chandler, Stewart's mother. Because of this, he was eventually arrested for statutory rape and sent to prison, creating a local scandal. The San Francisco Chronicle had published a series of articles about the events, supposedly written by reporter Paul Avery, dubbing the affair the Ice Cream Romance. Stewart and Mustafa imply these articles fomented a desire for revenge, although how any of the 5 confirmed Zodiac murders could fulfill those desires is anyone's guess. As a possible secondary motive, Stewart claims that all the Zodiac victims bore a strong likeness to his mother, Van Best apparently awash with some type of highly focused misogyny. Admittedly, Betty Lou Jensen and Darlene Ferrin do look a little alike, but Cecilia Shepard does not, though this is, of course, a matter of subjective opinion. How does one explain the murder of Paul Stine using this motive? It is interesting to note that Van Best was known to have a scar on his right index finger, similar to an unidentified print found on Stein's cab. It is also interesting to note that when comparing these two fingerprints, Police Lieutenant Bob Garrett found that it was necessary to reverse and reorient the prints to create a reasonable match. Stewart and Mustafa also contend evidence for Van Best's guilt can be found in the Zodiac's ciphers and handwriting, the later assertion supported by forensic document examiner Michael Wachschel. Curiously, in the solved 408, the ciphertext JR appears 2 lines above the plain word text Best, and Earl Van Best Jr. contains 13 characters, though considering the pitfalls one typically faces in cryptanalysis, these are hardly unassailable facts. Upon comparing Zodiac letters to a marriage certificate created immediately after Van Best's marriage to Judith Chandler, Wachschel concludes, quote, "In my years of experience with document examination, I have rarely seen 2 sets of handwriting compare so closely to each other." Unquote. It was later determined by investigator Mike Rodelli that the certificate used in Wachschel's analysis was in fact written by Reverend Edward Fleiger, the man who presided over the related ceremony. As one might suspect, no one has yet claimed the good Reverend to be the Zodiac. Also known by the name Donald Jeff Andrews, a pseudonym concocted by Robert Graysmith for his book Zodiac, Richard Marshall was born in Texas in 1928, making his age consistent with the description of every eyewitness to Zodiac crimes. Known to have lived in San Francisco between 1969 and 1989, Marshall may have, according to statements made by acquaintances, also lived in the Riverside area in 1966, placing him near the murder site of Sherry Jo Bates. During his time in San Francisco, Marshall worked as both a projectionist at the Avenue Movie Theater and as an engineer for KTIM, a Bay Area radio station. Marshall was a ham radio enthusiast and had at one time invited a handful of fellow radio buffs and listeners to his Scott Street basement residence to see his radio setup. When interviewed by police later, some of these guests noted Marshall's behavior as generally peculiar, although this amounts to very little. One man's peculiarity is another man's habit. Marshall was known to have a lifelong fascination with early cinema, counting among his favorites the silent French production Le Spectre Rouge, or The Red Spectre. This is quite curious, considering a mysterious letter sent to the Chronicle on July 8th of 1974, which many believe to be the work of the Zodiac, and was signed The Red Phantom, Red with Rage. Another weird, though admittedly vague, link involving old movies is the 1933 film Charlie Chan at Treasure Island, the existence of which likely would have been known to a vintage screen buff like Marshall. In the movie, Detective Chan investigates the death of a friend, a San Francisco writer, eventually butting heads with a villain, hypnotist, and blackmailer, Dr. Zodiac. The Zodiac's signature symbol is very reminiscent of the circle and crosshairs on a Universal film leader, commonly used at the beginning of movie reels to help align the film into a projector. As a working projectionist, this was something with which Marshall was undoubtedly familiar. Marshall was also undoubtedly familiar with the Gilbert and Sullivan comic opera, The Mikado, and its film adaptations of 1939 and 1967, although there is no evidence he held any special affinity for either its music or libretto. The Mikado is referred to in the Zodiac's Little List letter of July 26, 1970. In the letter, the Zodiac transcribes the lyrics to the aria often called the I've Got a Little List. This is, in fact, where this particular piece of correspondence gets its name. Another Zodiac letter, generally believed authentic, known as the Exorcist letter, also contains another Mikado reference, all of which does seem odd when considering Marshall's love of the theatrical. Also in the Exorcist letter are a strange system of symbols which have been claimed by some to be a convoluted reference to the call letters of KTIM, the radio station which employed Marshall. This seems to stretch credulity, as a great deal of imagination is required to force the letters into place. However, Richard Marshall's guilt or innocence notwithstanding, the strange symbols do seem to bear a striking resemblance to a section of the 340 cipher, notable as the only part of the cipher to have a blatant correction. Many investigators have theorized the Zodiac was ambidextrous, as document examination of Zodiac letters have consistently shown right-handedness, while many of the actions undertaken by him during crimes, such as the manipulation of weapons, could have been more easily accomplished using his left. Marshall was in fact ambidextrous. Some samples of Marshall's handwriting seem to share certain characteristics with the Zodiac's, such as a similarity in the formation of certain lowercase letters and a general slant to the writing. Marshall's knowledge of electronics lends credence to the idea that he could have designed the device described in the bus bomb letter of November 9, 1969, though again, this is speculation. Any reasonably intelligent hobbyist could have done the same. Although still considered a top suspect in the minds of some, Napa County Sheriff's Detective Ken Narlow, a lead investigator who considered Marshall his favorite, eventually discounted him, stating, quote, "Marshall makes good reading, but not a very good suspect in my estimation," unquote. In a 1989 interview for the television documentary Crimes of the Century, Marshall summed up his feelings about his involvement.
The fact is that the characteristics you just mentioned fit me almost to a T. I really am startled at the mass and accuracy of the detail. And obviously, if they had been that forthcoming about that at the time, I would have understood why they were investigating me.
By far, the most famous of all Zodiac suspects was Arthur Leigh Allen. Much has been made over the circumstantial evidence that points, often with laser-like intensity, in his direction. Allen was born on December 18th of 1933 in Honolulu, Hawaii. His family soon relocated to Vallejo, California, where he spent the majority of his formative years, graduating from Vallejo High School in 1950 and receiving an Associate of Arts degree from Vallejo College in 1957. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy later that year, only to be discharged under less than honorable circumstances in December of 1958. He pursued a series of jobs in and around the Northern California Bay Area from then on. The following are known facts about Arthur Leigh Allen, taken primarily from reports made by Police Detective George Bowert and Sergeant Jack Malonix of the Vallejo Police Department. In the mid-1960s, Allen had been fired from his job with the Greater Vallejo Recreation District, where he worked as a lifeguard and trampoline instructor. The head of the GVRD, Ted Kidder, had received a great number of complaints from parents about Allen's questionable behavior toward the children under his supervision, and thought it best to let Allen go, though no formal complaint was filed with police. Between 1959 and 1970, when not working for the GVRD, Allen worked at various elementary schools, serving as first a teacher and later a janitor. On multiple occasions, Allen was found to be engaging in behavior that, according to Valley Springs Elementary Principal Buzz Fleming, blurred the lines between friendliness and familiarity. Caught engaging in lewd behavior with a student, Allen was forced to resign from his teaching position in 1968 and was ultimately arrested in September 1974 for child molestation. Several months later, he was sentenced to a Atascadero State Hospital until August of 1977. Allen's sister-in-law, Karen, stated to police that Allen was highly misogynistic, had never had a serious relationship with a woman his own age, and deeply resented her as somehow having driven a wedge between him and his brother Ron. Particularly, Karen Allen noted that her brother-in-law often expressed a deep contempt for his own mother, even when he was within her presence, despite his shrewish mother doting on him both domestically and financially. Throughout his correspondence, it was common for Zodiac to misspell words. According to his brother Ron, Allen was known to do the same intentionally for comic effect. This was confirmed by police during the search of Allen's residence in 1991, when a note was found where the word eggs was spelled A-I-G-S. This idiosyncratic habit was also independently mentioned by Karen Allen, certain she had received a Christmas card with a peculiar spelling of a common phrase. As mentioned earlier, it is believed the Zodiac may be ambidextrous. Allen steadfastly maintained that he was exclusively right-handed. However, his brother, among others, indicated that Allen was born left-handed and was forced to write with his right hand by teachers, a not unheard-of occurrence in decades past. Glenn Reinhardt, Allen's best friend, also confirmed that Allen could write with his left hand. This is not as trivial a fact as it might seem. Forcing a child to write with their non-dominant hand has been linked to several behavioral problems, including bedwetting, stuttering, chronic nail-biting, poor concentration and memory, dyslexia, chronic lethargy, extreme introversion, and what may be described as a generally neurotic personality. The verbal descriptions of the Zodiac by survivors Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell indicate the killer was a white male of a heavy build with a pot belly. Arthur Leigh Allen was a white male with a heavy build and a pot belly. Allen owned a Zodiac watch. This was likely given to him by his mother in 1967 as a Christmas gift, and it was confiscated from his residence during a police investigation in February of 1991. The watch company's logo is the same as the Zodiac killer's. During the investigation of the Lake Berryessa attack site, the Napa County Sheriff's Department determined the shoe prints of the attacker were of a size 10.5. Arthur Leigh Allen wore a size 10.5 shoe. In the bus bomb letter of November 9, 1969, Zodiac stated his killing tools were purchased through mail order. Mail order catalog pages were found at Allen's residence regarding bombs, booby traps, and firearms. In a teacher evaluation form for Calaveras Unified School District, completed in March of 1967, Allen's work performance is listed as satisfactory, but that he should take more care in his dress. It is interesting the 3 female witnesses to the strange man who was likely the Zodiac at Lake Berryessa noted him as a sloppy dresser. During his arrest and incarceration for child molestation, Allen was effectively in state custody between September of 1974 and August of 1977. Between July of 1974 and April of 1978, no Zodiac correspondence, suspected or otherwise, was received. Strangely, the Zodiac letter of April 24, 1978 begins, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am back with you." Although this letter is believed by many to be in fact a hoax, and no other letter after this date has ever been authenticated. A letter sent to the Riverside Police Department from the killer of Sherry Jo Bates was typed on a Royal brand typewriter with Elite type. The same brand and model were found during the 1991 police search of Allen's home. .22 caliber Super X brand ammunition was also found, the same type used during the Lake Herman Road murders. Also, during said search, police obtained pipe bombs in the basement of Allen's residence, along with formulas for explosives made from ammonium nitrate and stove oil. In the bus bomb letter of November 1969, Zodiac stated, "You don't know whether the death machine is at the site or whether it is being stored in my basement for future use." According to his former friend Don Cheney, in the mid-1960s Allen liked a waitress who worked at a pancake house near his Vallejo home. Whether this affinity was romantic or purely platonic isn't clear. Though Cheney could not recall the waitress's name, Darlene Farron was a waitress at an international house of pancakes about a 1/10 of a mile from Allen's front door. Allen had at one time stated his favorite piece of fiction was The Most Dangerous Game, a short story written in 1924 by Richard Connell. In this story, a man named General Zaroff had become bored with hunting wild animals and took to hunting down shipwrecked sailors for sport, giving them only a knife, food, and a 3-hour head start. The plaintext of the 408 cipher states, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest." Philip Tucker, general supervisor for the GVRD and friend of Allen's, recalled having a conversation with Allen about mounting a small light onto a gun barrel so that a person could shoot accurately at night, an interesting fact considering the events surrounding the murders on Lake Herman Road. Also, according to Tucker, when visiting Allen at his home, he and his wife were shown a document on which, among other things, were neatly printed symbols similar to those used in Zodiac ciphers. Allen refused to let Tucker take the document for further examination, instead promising to make a copy, which he never did. When questioned by police, Tucker also recalled Allen did not own a brown mid-60s Corvair, the car described by Michael Mageau as being driven by his attacker. However, Tucker did recall owning just such a car himself, and that during the summer of 1969, he had parked it at a service station in Vallejo at the corner of Nebraska and Broadway streets, with the hopes of selling it. He had left the keys at the station for safekeeping. Arthur Leigh Allen was employed at this service station during this period. Allen was only absent from work a single day in the entire year of 1966, on Tuesday, November 1st. Sherry Jo Bates was murdered very late on Sunday, October 30th. In October of 1969, Allen was interviewed by Vallejo Police Sergeant John Lynch regarding his whereabouts on September 27th of that year, the date of the Lake Berryessa attack. Allen stated that he had in fact planned to go to Lake Berryessa on that date, but had decided at the last minute to go skin diving at the ocean instead. Later, Allen, apparently under the mistaken impression that police were in possession of a knife of his, volunteered, quote, "The 2 knives I had in my car with blood on them, the blood came from a chicken I had killed." Unquote. On January 31st, 2015, a Santa Rosa, California man discovered an improvised explosive device buried in his backyard. The Sonoma County Sheriff's Department safely disarmed the device, noting its apparent homemade construction, and that it had been buried for some time, roots having wrapped around it and its outer casing partially deteriorated. Allen was known to own a trailer home in Santa Rosa around the time the 32 map cipher was sent, the accompanying letter clearly stating a bomb was hidden somewhere. While it is true the map does not show Santa Rosa, which is several miles to the north, the coincidental details are too numerous to be ignored out of hand. On August 26, 1992, Allen died of arteriosclerotic heart failure while at his Vallejo residence. A final search warrant was served, revealing more explosive formulas, and a videotape purported to contain television interviews pertaining to the Zodiac killer. Clearly, if not guilty of at least some of the Zodiac crimes, Arthur Leigh Allen must be one of the unluckiest men in recorded history. Admittedly, mounting an effective defense of a universally unsavory character like Allen is an uphill struggle worthy of Sisyphus, but such is possible when considering exculpatory evidence. The most obvious problem with Allen as a suspect is that he doesn't resemble the police composite from the Paul Stine murder. This sketch was made using what were arguably the clearest eyewitness observations, yet Allen is simply too moon-faced. Officer Folk, who presumably got a very good look at the individual in question, also stated the man had a crew cut. While it may be seen as an understandable error in low-light conditions, Allen was clearly balding and had been for several years prior. Allen does resemble the sketch made after the Lake Berryessa attack, but if that was indeed Allen, who was the man seen after Paul Stine's murder? Oddly, though he sometimes alluded to his previous crimes, the Lake Berryessa attack was never mentioned by Zodiac at any time after the September 27th phone call. A strange behavior for someone so bent on taunting his pursuers. Although Allen was far from a law-abiding saint, his criminal history would seem to actually work against the theory of him being a Zodiac. Allen was a sexual deviant and pedophile, but nothing in any of the Zodiac's attacks were of a sexual nature. While it could certainly be argued that such gratification may have been wholly internalized, the fact that none of the female victims were in any way sexually assaulted seems odd. Even so, to go from admitted pedophile to homicidal mastermind is quite the quantum leap in criminal activity. Viewers might rightly find both activities reprehensible, but moral equivalency does not necessarily translate to equivalent criminal compulsions. No finger or palm print has ever linked Allen, or anyone for that matter, to any Zodiac crime scene. Allen has never been shown to be at any of the crime scenes during the commission of said crimes, though to be fair, he seems never to have been very far away either. In 2002, the San Francisco Police Department compared a sample of Allen's DNA to a partial DNA profile taken from saliva remnants found on stamps and envelopes from Zodiac correspondence. Allen was not a match. Thinking that another individual might have sealed the envelopes and affixed stamps for him, a DNA test was also run against samples taken from Don Cheney, Allen's friend of several years. Cheney was also not a match. Of course, if Allen was the Zodiac, he may have used someone other than Cheney. Finally, document examinations performed by police handwriting expert Lloyd Cunningham is telling. Quote, "They gave me banana boxes full of Allen's writing, and none of his writing even came close to the Zodiac." Unquote. Cunningham later noted that Allen's purported ability to switch his writing hand at will could account for any discrepancy, though given Allen's untimely death, this theory would seem hopelessly open-ended. Among the last items found during the 1992 police search of Allen's home was a copy of a last will and testament. The document is notable for its ultimately snarky tone, understandable for a man who had suffered a lifetime of unjust persecution, or perhaps a narcissistic need to distort the truth one last time. The sheer amount of information regarding the Zodiac killer one can find on the internet is positively stupefying. Hundreds if not thousands of pages, sites, and comment threads support an equally diverse number of theories. Any video that attempted to comprehensively cover the subject would be tens of hours in length, and necessarily venture into a narrative complexity worthy of the JFK assassination or Roswell UFO conspiracies. We should never forget the Zodiac was a real person who committed real horrible acts of evil to real people just going about their lives. If nothing else, he should be a reminder that humankind is often its own worst enemy. Perhaps in the future, removed from the current era, he will become a myth told to frighten the foolish, a voice whispered from the darkened corner of the unlit room.